Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru. And welcome to this episode of Autobiography of a Yogi, line by line. This is episode 3 of chapter 4. And we will have a few more parts, a few more episodes to cover this chapter. But in this part, if anybody does want to read along, the scope is from the paragraph that says, deeming it advisable to leave Hardwar at once. And it goes all the way to, if we started a trek over such dangerous jungle land. So I'll pause for 2 seconds. If you want to pause, read, digest it, and then join us in the conversation, freeze frame. Pause, okay, we did that. You can read along with us and joining.
I wonder what proportion of listeners are actually like doing this study with us. Let us know in the comments. Are you just watching and consuming, or are you actually like following the bits to read? So then you're informed about what we will discuss and what we will miss, no doubt.
Yes.
I would probably, when I hear this, I would then have to take the book afterwards and then read that section all over again, right? Just to get it back into my mind what everything was.
Yeah, but I don't know if we represent the people, because not everyone would do a 5-year project on making it a podcast to analyze it line by line.
Yeah. That's true. But I'm into I listen to podcasts also on sometimes on different things, on different books or different TV shows, and that's how I do it. I listen to the podcast first, which spoils everything, and then I watch the TV show. I don't know why.
You know, what's amazing is, although we're doing this multi-year project on this amazing book, the amount of detail in there, we're missing. We're going to miss stuff. You know, for any listeners, if you read and then think, oh, the guys didn't talk about this, or they didn't cover this in depth, do comment, because this is what this all is about. So yeah, it's pretty amazing how much depth there is. Even on a 1 hour plus episode, which we do try to bring down, you can still miss a lot. Yogananda does cover a lot of topics in a short time. So in this episode, we're going to talk about the boys finally getting caught by a policeman. And then the policeman does reveal a pretty magical miracle story. And then we're going to look at the elusive Himalayas, and Yogananda pushes it one step too far. So we're going to end there on that last part. So we'll talk about the boys finally getting caught. Now, this is continuing on from the previous episode, the previous part of this chapter, where Yogananda has a premonition of his capture, and it was weighing heavy on his mind. So the boys had changed clothes from European garb to their traditional clothing. And then here it is that they're looking to leave at once to Rishikesh from Hardwar. And really, the boys are focused heavily on making it to Rishikesh. So this is now delving into what comes next. So they had boarded the train. Well, Yogananda had boarded the train, and Amar was lagging behind. And the policeman had caught up with him pretty quickly, and it brought them to an abrupt halt. And there was a big shout from the policeman, so he was coming at them with urgency. Now, this is it. This is the end for them. So what the policeman does is, they're boys, so he takes their money. And I was reminded about this, that they are boys, they're children. So the policeman had authority over them as an adult and took their money and escorted them to the police station and held them there until Yogananda's brother Ananta arrived. So really, the first thing that comes to my mind is, this is game over. There's no way that they can skip this. The money is gone now, and they have been caught, and their plans have been thwarted. Yogananda drops a nice little comment here about Rishikesh, and he says, a soil long hallowed by the feet of many masters. So this must be the route that many yogis and sadhus would take to go to the Himalayas. So he's following this pilgrimage But it is a beautiful comment, and we can kind of pick that apart a little bit. But Priyank, I'll come
Yeah,
to you.
it's a route that kind of follows the river Ganga north, and then the Ganga splits just north of this area. It splits into two rivers, and then it goes even further to more mystical places like Kedarnath or Badrinath. There's some pilgrimage places there that they call the mini Char Dham Yatra, which is the 4 pilgrimage sites in that area. But Rishikesh is a cool name as well. So Rishi means like saint, Rishi. So Kesh is like the land of the saints, and then therefore it's, he's very much justified in calling it the soil long hallowed by the feet of many masters. Says it quite mystically, doesn't he, Mike?
He does. I was going to focus on another aspect of this, because when I was there, it's a very beautiful scenery, right? It's like Priyank said, there's like the river going through, and you're like in this valley, and it's beautiful. And I find it astonishing that even in this time, they already had like a railway going through those mountains there, which must have been a feat of engineering. But it also shows how important the city always was culturally, right? Like it didn't just become famous because the Beatles went there. It was always very important for Hindu culture.
Yeah, and also in reference to the land hallowed by, a soil long hallowed by the feet of many masters. So in reminder to people, so this soil then becomes holy because it has had the physical touch of master. And the way to, so I went to a place called Vrindavan, which is where Krishna spent his childhood. And so I went there, and I went there in a devotional mood and went to the various places of the law, and did my prayers and went to all those sites of pilgrimage. This was some 15 years ago or something. And then after that, I thought it was very nice, good experience. And then I came home, and then I started studying some of the scripture surrounding Krishna. So there's a Bhagavad Puran, or Srimad Bhagavatam, we sometimes call it, which is basically it's about all the incarnations of Krishna or Vishnu, of which Krishna is one. And it says Uddhava, his cousin, when he was going into Vrindavan, he before stepping foot inside the gate, he stopped and got himself in a mode of devotion, and he completely prostrated on the ground and touched his forehead to the soil. And then he went through this process, or this initiation, as it were, before even entering the ground. And I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't do any such thing. So next time I go, I'm going to do something similar to that. Mm-hmm. It's quite beautifully described in the scripture about how high the state of Uddhava's devotion is to Krishna, his cousin. And similarly, Rishikesh is obviously of similar renown.
And people talk about, Yogananda having had presence in a room, walking, doing his meditations and walking around headquarters, in the Lake Shrine, and people go there and feel very, at peace. And there's a sense about the place where you have that magic and that feel about it. So whenever I think about it like that. There's so many masters that walk there. And, they've clearly sprinkled a little of that peace and loveliness around the area. So for me, it's I definitely want to get there, just to see what it would be like. Before I go on, Mike, I'll come to you.
Yeah, I wonder if I went to Hardwar station now and I went to the ticket office, if that's the same ticket office where they were sitting back in the day. That would be interesting if you feel the vibe there.
Yeah. We'll talk about how the boys reacted to, getting caught in a little bit, but just to go back to the soil hallowed line, it kind of stood out to me. And if you recall, his last words, Yogananda's last words before his Masamati was of India. And this is just one of the, not the first comment, but one of the comments throughout the autobiography of Yogi, where Yogananda references his love for India and his love, for that land, and as he says, the hallowed soil. But he said, you can quote him saying, "Where Ganges woods, Himalayan caves, and men dream God, I am hallowed, my body touched that sod." And it's a beautiful, beautiful line. Makes me emotional actually just reading that line. It's so powerful. And yeah, so I thought that reminded me of it. Yogananda's love for his country. And there's something interesting about the spiritual wealth of India as well, and maybe the protection that might garner in India in some ways, having had so many great masters touch the soil of India. Mike?
Yeah, and I think Rishikesh is a particular place because of its location. I feel like a lot of the pilgrimage spots that are further down in the Himalayas, they are kind of reachable through Rishikesh. So a lot of religious pilgrims, their first stop would be Hardwar or Rishikesh, and then from there they move on. And I feel like that's also a reason why it's so spiritually charged, because there's so many different spiritual groups that go through there all the time.
Nice. So we have the policeman then. He's caught up with the boys. He's taken hold of them and he's brought them to the police station. And they are just boys. So I thought to myself, gosh, that must have been a bit of a nerve-wracking experience. But no, far from it. The boys are as rebellious as ever, as we'll soon find out. So the policeman, he's working with Ananda, right? So he knows that he has to hold these two boys for one of their older brothers. So Ananda is hot on their tail, even though they've changed garb, even though they've changed from the European garb into the Indian traditional garb. So I thought that was very, very, very good work from the policeman there to pick the boys out, and good work from Ananda to track them down. So he finally caught up with them. Mike?
Yeah, I think it shows what a talented organizer Ananta is, right? Like he's not like the kind of person, like I don't think anyone, like Guruji doesn't give him much credit because he's more in an adversarial position to him here. But Ananta is like really like he talks to all of those people at the stations, at the policemen, and he uses them all as kind of his pawns to kind of like find out where Mukunda is and make him come back. And so he must be a very persuasive and very, very, very smart person in a detective kind of sense.
I'm just impressed that in the days with no phones, you can't just pick up and run and call someone and say, hey, barricade that and road before they escape. It was very well organized, very quick to react, and he's obviously being successful in his attempts. So thought it's good kudos to Ananta there for work well done for having taken the elder brother role and delivered on that. His mother would have been proud. So the policeman's story then, this is the bulk of the bit that we'll read out. Now, there's a lot here to break down. I'm going to run through it first, and then we can kind of go back over the story and pick out the parts that we want to dissect and talk about. So the policeman learns then about the boy's final destination being the Himalayas. And he has this story, coincidentally, to tell them about how he met a saintly man, a sadhu, and he just 5 days earlier and just the day before as well. So he says that he was with a fellow police officer, and they were patrolling the Ganges, and they were on the lookout for a murderer who was acting as a sadhu, pretending to be a sadhu and robbing pilgrims, and he must have been known for murdering people as well. So quite a dangerous individual. And they were looking for this person. And they found what he describes as a figure, which resembled the description of the criminal. And the policeman obviously shouted out and asked the individual to stop. And the individual ignored them and must have walked on. And it says, as the police were approaching the back of this figure, so the figure obviously hadn't even turned around by this point, they were just walking on, ignoring them. The police wielded an axe with tremendous force and hit the figure's right arm and almost severed it completely. So we know there that they weren't messing around, that this was obviously somebody they really wanted to apprehend. Mike, do you want to jump in?
Am I the only one who finds it strange for a policeman to have an axe on them? Is that normal? Like, is that?
That's maybe because it was like a murderer, they had to
Right.
protect themselves, and maybe guns were not really around at that time, perhaps. So, what's the best weapon? It is a horrific thought, though, with officers walking around with an axe.
Yeah, and they were taking no precaution. They were taking no precautions. They went up. The individual hadn't turned around.
I wonder how many other sadhus they decapitated that day.
You might never know if they were allowed to tell the story or not. But this one was. So this sadhu turned around and said that he was not the murderer that you're seeking. So it had clairvoyance, and we'll talk about these bits. And the policemen were astonished, it's safe to say. And they were prostrating themselves at the feet of this sadhu and offering the turban cloth to help stop the flow of blood that was inevitably coming out of the stump of the arm. And again, the reaction from the sadhu is pretty remarkable. And this is a line I'll probably not forget. Son, that was just an understandable mistake on your part. Given the context, I'm not sure if I agree, but we'll come back to talk about it in a bit. So the saint then was very kind, responded, come back in a few days, and beloved mother's taking care of me, and you'll not reproach yourself. You'll see that I'll be healed. And so that's indeed what the policeman did. And 3 days later, the day before he apprehended Yogananda, the policeman, the two of them, went to meet this sadhu under a tree and found that there was no scar or trace of any hurt at all to the sadhu's arm. And the sadhu then cheekily says that he's heading off to Rishikesh, to the Himalayas, nonetheless. And he blessed them, which was lovely, and departed quite quickly. And the policeman reflected on the experience a little bit there. So that's the whole story. So we'll go over it bit by bit. But Mike, do you want to jump in with a comment?
Yeah, I mean that section that we that came after, where he hits him with the axe, and then he just calmly responds, "I'm not the murderer you're seeking." I wonder how he convinced the policeman that suddenly he's this saintly sadhu and not the murderer, right? Like, was there some kind of telepathic thing going on, or was it just his demeanor, or was it that he didn't feel any pain, that he was able to speak calmly? And then the reaction that he practices forgiveness. Like, if someone hits me with an axe, I don't know. It's shows this must have been an incredible moment.
He kind of read his mind, so a bit of clairvoyance there, because the sadhu said, "I'm not the murderer you're seeking." So the police officer probably didn't say, "Hey, stop, murderer." He just went towards him and shouted at him to stop, and the sadhu obviously didn't respond. So that would have been a clue. And certainly if he's this elevated, then his divinity would have been like oozing through every pore of his being, wouldn't it? And he was also, it's interesting, he was also going towards the Rishikesh or wherever. And we further emphasized this point about the magic or the mystical dimensions in the Himalayas, because the officer also says, if it's Himalayas you're after, then I've got a great story for you. And so it's like this, it's like really embedded in the culture and stories of India, where these wonderful figures in history, starting from Shiva himself. Like, so if you go the furthest up north point in the Himalayas, you get to the, you know, the mouth, the just at the start of Tibet, and then the most important place of pilgrimage for most Indians and Buddhists and Jains and other religions in that area is the Kailash. You know, that's the head. So like there's a lot there as you go further and further north, and this is probably why, you know, these stories are so remembered across the Indian mindset, I suppose.
Yeah, they're stories, most of them you would imagine are quite old. Maybe I could say that. I don't really know many of them. Prudent, you might know one or two. But this one is brand new. And that's what's really about this one. It was literally the day before.
Yeah,
And
that's crazy.
you know, you talk about a coincidence, which, you know, if you believe them, fair play, but I don't miss. And this one doesn't seem to be a coincidence, does it? But, the sadhu had been walking on his way to do a pilgrimage to the Himalayas, and a policeman just cuts his arm off, and he knows that, oh, you're looking for a murderer, it's not me. But that's the location that the boys are trying to get to as well. So the coincidence is there as well. It's, you know, they're both trying to get to the same location. And what struck me about this was, you know, the boys have this fanciful idea, this fanciful plan of trying to get to the Himalayas. And they're there, you know, trying their hardest to do this, to execute this plan, but they're thwarted left, right, and center, and their plan falls apart ultimately. And Yogananda's path goes one way, and he meets his master, who's not in the Himalayas. But that's, you know, another story. But that's the reality that he goes on to live, and the actual life that he goes on to live. This is more of a fantasy that they have. The boys, you know, want to make pussycats out of tigers, and you know, live up there in Himalayas somehow. And I thought, well, here's the reality. You know, this is the contrast where you've got the boys, you know, fanciful dream, and then this exalted sadhu who's actually achieved, you know, so much, and you know, they're off to the Himalayas, and that's where the boys want to get to in the end. And I thought maybe there was a lesson in there, you know, in time. You know, everything will come in time. And, you know, you can focus on your life elsewhere for the meantime. But anyway, Priyanka, I'll come to you now.
In time, good saying there, because for what I'm about to say, which is a bit radical. Have you guys seen Everything Everywhere All at Once yet?
Not yet, no.
Not yet.
Oh, okay. I won't reveal it then.
No, go for it.
It's won like multiple Oscars, and the concept is it's about parallel universes and a non-linear sort of like time frame kind of thing. And for those who aren't familiar with parallel universes, it's like this concept where you know, there's an infinite number of planetary systems that are just like this one, and in many of them, this specific scenario that us three, for example, are playing right now, there'll be an infinite number of slight variations to that scenario. And so what I was going to say was, in a past life or in a different universe or a slightly different time, Mukunda, we know that he was, you know, a yogi amidst the Himalayan snows in a past life. So he, in a different universe, he may have been that very rishi that was walking along, and that police officer, you know, wielded his axe off and you know, cut off his arm. So I thought it was quite cool, that film, and you know, it reminded me of it, as Chris, as what you were saying, was that, you know, this fanciful idea of these kids, you know, going there and taming pussycats and going to the Himalayas and living off nothing but you know, air and a few rupees.
A friend has just mentioned that film to me as well, so I feel like I need to watch it soon, because otherwise I'm gonna get spoilers left and right all the time. I wonder if multiverses are actually a thing, or if we will at some point find out that it's not real. But it's fascinating. There's this like there's one TV show that kind of illustrated it really interestingly, where every time somebody would roll a dice anywhere in the world, you would create 6 different universes, where one universe where that dice was a 1 and a 2. Yeah.
I think Yogananda, maybe I'm mistaken, but he makes reference to multiverse. I think I was going to scramble to see if I could find it somewhere, but I'm pretty sure he makes reference to there being more than one universe. Pretty sure. Maybe the listeners can pull that out for us somewhere, because we're doing this in real time, but it's in the back of my mind somewhere. Yogananda's talked about it, so I'll leave it there, Mike. But yeah, I think this is a real coincidence, and I don't really see it as that. I think that the universe has conspired to give this story for the boys at this time for a lesson learned, that maybe only Yogananda might know, and hasn't quite shared it with us, but we're obviously enjoying the story very much. So maybe the clairvoyance that the sadhu seemed to express there goes beyond the murder label that he had on his back, to having maybe playing a part in this whole story that Yogananda is playing out for us right now.
They both were obviously very happy to hear that story, right? That story made them happy. I wonder if that also made them feel like they were going into the right direction, because like Guruji says, God is everywhere and you have to seek him inside, not on the outside. But then there are places where it's more likely to find a saintly sadhu than others, right? And so when they went there and heard that story, maybe they saw that as a confirmation that if it would have worked out, they would have met a saintly sadhu there as well. So it's not all. I'm not sure if they actually saw the whole thing as a failure. Maybe they saw it at not this time. We'll come back some other time for it.
Yeah, we'll see very soon, because the boys, they give us a bit of an insight there. But I thought to myself, have I asked the question of myself of why the Himalayas? What is it about the Himalayas that attracts so many saints? And we know Babaji is one of the more famous yogis there now. Yogananda helped make famous. But there's many yogis, many great yogis, Shiva and many others, as Frank you mentioned earlier, that seek the Himalayas. And one answer that I thought I could put forward was the perfect conditions for meditation. So if you're in a cave, I remember watching this documentary one time of a guy really, really deep into a cave, and he had sound equipment with him, and he was able to show that it was almost perfect of zero sound. Like there was almost no sound at all, in the depths of this cave. And I thought to myself, well, maybe that's one thing, because we're taught, plug your ears and meditate, draw on any of the senses, and maybe that's just this immersive world that you can go into in this deep cave in the Himalayas where there's no sound of anything, and you can meditate in blissful peace. What do you think, Craig?
My sister, interesting, you could talk about sound levels. My sister gave me her broken Apple Watch, and she's like, why don't you fix it and you can use it? And I was like, I don't really fancy fixing it, but I'll see what I can what use I can make out of it. I tried it for a few months, and the best use I found is the sound level, the decibel. It gives you a decibel sound level. So right now, as I'm speaking, it's 670 decibels. And then if I go on a very loud London Underground train, it's like 90 decibels, and it says move away from this place because you're damaging your hearing. And I personally am very, very sensitive to sound levels. So whenever I go in the underground, I always I like have ear things, ear defenders, and I notice like kids also, when they go, they're really sensitive as well, so they tightly cover their ears when they go on the underground. But yeah, I always try and seek out places, Chris, that are quiet, shall we say. It's one of the reasons we moved where I live right now, because where I used to live was close to roads, and now it's more closer to trees.
Isn't it also a thing that at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, the Pandavas, they go into the Himalayas on their way to heaven, right? I'm not sure, maybe before that, there were also, I mean, I think that there were saints before that in the Himalayas, but maybe especially in the lower ages, the saints, they don't mingle so much with the people and they stay more in the mountains, and then maybe in the higher ages they come down. That's just a theory.
Yeah, lots of saints. Pandavas, that was in the end of the Mahabharata, I think.
Okay.
The Bhagavad Gita was purely on the battlefield, about 5 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, another thing that came to mind was the energy in mountains, that there's energies being pulled up and up and up and up. And I think that might actually aid in the spiritual pursuit as well, being near mountains for that reason.
And these are the world's youngest mountains, the Himalayan ranges, because because of that continent moving into Asia, right? So that's, of all the mountains, that's the newest event to occur that's pushing the mountains up. So even though they're the tallest, they're the most new. So you might go along with that story of energetically vibrant, because there's still crazy magic happening.
No, I might have to correct you there. I don't think they are the tallest mountains.
Oh, the Himalayas?
Yeah, I think the tallest mountains might be, is it Peru? There's 2 taller mountains. I think there's the difference between from the sea level and the height of the actual mountain. Okay. So yeah, let's take that offline, because I think that might be true. There's maybe South America, somewhere in South America. Anyway, Mike.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure when it comes to sea level, then the Himalayas are the highest. But I think you're right, Chris, that if you measure from the bottom of a mountain to the top, I think there's higher ones. I think Mount Denali in Alaska is actually one of the highest mountains if you measure it like that. And if you measure if you say a mountain can start under the ocean, then I think it's one of those islands. I don't remember which one though.
Oh. Yeah, I'm googling it now, but we're going.
We're going off piste.
Off piste, exactly.
I need to know.
We'll come back to that. But it does. Lots of questions there about why the Himalayas, and for Yogananda, it's quite specific. He's had visions, and he's spoken to Himalayan gurus. And wants to be with them. He's exclaimed that himself, that he wants to be with them. So he's got a very specific purpose, of trying to get there. Priyank?
Maybe this sadhu was Babaji.
Yeah.
How would we know?
How would we know?
Yeah, he didn't say his name.
No, but yeah, it could. I love the speculation. And yeah, it could indeed be.
Well, Babaji means just a holy person, Baba, right? A respectful name for a holy person. So if this police officer was relating the story in Hindi, which he probably would have been, he might have said there was this Babaji, and he he came to us and had to chop off his arm.
Yeah, and it could have been one of the many Himalayan yogis that probably were watching over Yogananda and his progress, probably with much interest. So who knows what interventions might have come into play in this story, but very coincidental. Then we'll leave it at that. That this sadhu with extremely developed sadhu was to play a part in this story. A little word actually we kind of grazed over it earlier on, learning that the trance destination had been the Himalayas. I thought that was quite a playful word, because trance, I had to search this. means a student who stays away from school without leave or explanation. And I thought, given the context that these, were young boys and running away of sorts, that was a very apt word to use and quite a playful one.
You didn't take part in truancy at school, Chris?
It seems to be only your mischievous.
It's a common UK pastime.
I could have been described as a truant a few times in my
Truant.
Truant. Thank you,
Yes.
truant.
Yeah, not in Ireland. In Ireland, people don't do that.
Yeah. Of course, then we have the ability of this sadhu, and this is, we could probably spend the entire podcast talking about it, but we'll talk about it a little bit. The description really was that the arm is severed, but not cut off entirely. And the sadhu says, not to worry. And he, as described, he pushed his dangling arm back into its stump, and it adhered, so it stayed there, and the blood inexplicably ceased to flow, as described in the book. I have to say, this is probably one of the more striking paragraphs in the whole of the Autobiography of a Yogi for me. And if you think maybe cynics, people who are skeptical of reading this book, I wonder how that sat with them, this paragraph, that somebody could literally just put their severed arm back into the stump. And it's a story that I remember. It's a story that I remember reading. So it really struck me quite considerably when I first read it. But this is an ability given to the sadhu, as he describes, the divine mother. It's so sweet. Divine, beloved mother, as he says, is taking care of me. So he is very humble. So much humility and peace coming from him in this moment, right? And he carries on his way and says, come back in 3 days. So I thought, okay, well, one, it's a miracle. How does this occur? And two, why does it take 3 days? Why did he say 3 days? Maybe was it just to keep it fresh in the minds of the policeman, to have it a day before, to verify a day before the meeting of Yogananda, or what was it? Was it that plus other reasons? Priyank, I'll come to you.
Yeah, that's a good point about 3 days. Because anticipation always makes the heart grow a bit more yearning, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And this was obviously a life transforming experience for this officer, as rightly it should be. So he could have said tomorrow, or in an hour, or now perhaps, but maybe he said 3 days. So this seed really takes root and germinates in that fertile moment for those two officers.
Yeah, and maybe he also tested their sincerity. Like, if he had done it right there in this moment, wouldn't have taken much, right? But they actually came back 3 days later to see him.
Yeah, I definitely would have come back to see that. Make no mistake about that. But this concept of healing, instantaneous healing, is played upon in cinema and films and books, isn't it? Everything from like the X-Men to like the Hero series, where there's always this one character that can heal, like instant healing or instant regeneration. And this is probably where those ideas originate, isn't it? These kind of little, just one paragraph in a book such as the Autobiography of a Yogi.
It's funny you mentioned that, because when I was reading over this, studying it for the podcast, I couldn't get Star Wars out of my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Like, these are not the droids you're looking for. Like, I am not the murderer you're looking for, kind of thing. And I thought, wow, like, this is obviously written, well before any kind of Star Wars scripts were. But you could have thought that some inspiration for those, those TV series and films, and all the Marvel series where Ant-Man can go infinitely small, and it's talking about the cities in some ways, and the cities, the 8 main cities that we have. You can go infinitely large, infinitely small, make yourself weigh infinitely heavy, or weigh infinitely light, and a few other really significant skills that you can obtain. And if anybody knows anything about them, they're obtained through rigorous, accomplished spiritual practices such as yoga and meditation. And it means perfection, accomplishment, or success in English, that word siddhi. So it's been expressed here by the sadhu in some way, that he has this ability to overcome the material plane, which is a pretty significant moment where, you know, your arm is severed off. But I thought for a moment we could pause and talk about that, because it's something that for me is in the book later on. We'll see that some saints and some yogis would try to show mastery over the elements. And then Yogananda makes comments like, "I don't get too caught up in these things. These are nice stories, nice things to do, but you've got bigger goals to focus on." And it kind of exemplifies it in this story in some ways, that you've got a saint that, you know, shows this miracle, this amazing ability to continue after being dealt such a wound, and says, "Oh yeah, I'm heading off to the Himalayas to be in solitude, to, you know, probably meditate in a cave somewhere with no one there." And it strikes me as a role model of sorts, given the circumstances. Very humbly goes about his business. But there you have it. Then we have a story of the sadhu with the miracle. Priyank, do you want to make a comment before we continue?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about his mastery over the senses, if now's an appropriate time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he one thing that's glossed over is that he basically shows no outward sign of pain or discomfort, because you know, in the book it says, "Without outcry or any glance at the ghastly wound, the stranger astonishingly continued his swift pace." So then he had to literally physically be stopped, and they don't make much reference to it, or Yogananda doesn't really explain much, but obviously he has explained it in other areas about the mastery over the senses. Now in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the, like, Krishna is named, is described by different names through the book, and one of the names that he's described as is Rishik. What is it? Not Rishikesh. I've forgotten. One of the names he's is Rishikesh. Yeah, Rishikesh means you know, control, like controller of the Krishna. Yogananda in the God Talks with Arjuna describes it as conqueror of the senses. You know, control, God of the senses. That's one of the translations of that word. And in the God Talks with Arjuna, chapter 12, there's a very nice section on this, and one of the most famous sections of the Gita that's often quoted, and it is section, so chapter 12 verse 18 and 19, it says, the verse says, "He who is tranquil before friend and foe alike, and in encountering adoration and insult, and during the experience of warmth and chill, and of pleasure and suffering, who has relinquished attachment regarding blame and praise in the same light, who is quiet and easily contented, not attached to domesticity, and of calm disposition and devotional, that person is dear me." So in this, is like all the like opposites that are there, i.e. pleasure and pain, or pleasure and suffering, and all those other like social things that he said, you know, basically happiness and sorrow and all those things. If you can be calm amongst all those moments that all of us experience in life, then basically you controlling the senses is part of that, when you've become a lord of the senses, or Rishikesh, or the place where they're going. Yeah. And then Yogananda then describes what that means in the explanation. Mike, do you want to carry on reading?
When a yogi knows this world to be a dream motion picture of God without objective reality, he beholds the manifestations of a friendly hero and a cruel villain, or the experiences of honor and dishonor, of heat and cold, of pain and pleasure, of insult and adulation, or of an utter dualistic presentation of the screen of his daily life to be entertaining but meaningless, ever-changing shadows of delusion. Such a calm yogi, tranquil in speech, body and mind, ever drinking the nectar of all-pervading bliss, is indeed very dear to God. He forsakes the degrading attributes depicted in the evil dream pictures of life, cultivating instead the divine attributes depicted in the salutary dream scenarios.
And that's the sadhu, describing the sadhu quite well, isn't it? And the sadhu that the policemen have come across. Unbeknownst to them, they were trying to seek out a murderer, and they found the saintly of the saints, and the sadhus. And this is what Yogananda was so seeking himself. So it's quite ironic, isn't it, that here we have these policemen who have had the honor of witnessing a miracle like this. So we can continue on to the next part, which really is that the officer concludes, and Yogananda describes it with pious ejaculation, that the officer is obviously moved beyond his usual depths. And I just thought that was quite a well put word to be able to really immerse you in what the policeman is experiencing, right? So it tells you a lot about the policeman in that one sentence. Brink?
Yeah, so at the time he was obviously instantly moved, and in relating the moment, as in recapturing the moment when he was telling it to Yogananda, he's moved in a different way. So when he actually chopped off his arm and then realized, what he's done and to whom he's done it, he kind of, he prostrated himself at his feet and implored pardon. And about that, actually, I was thinking about that. What do you think? Why is it in all cultures that when you view like a worshipping someone or that you want to seek forgiveness, like there's always a reference to like, go to their feet. It seems to transcend cultures, doesn't it? I mean, people going to Christ, and in India, feet and lotus feet is such a big thing. It seems to be just an accepted way of acknowledging your devotion to someone. Mike, Chris?
Yeah, I was, I have an answer myself, and I don't know if it's all that good, so I was going to try to Google the better one. But
now I need to hear it.
In general, whenever I think about this, I think, kings and queens as well. Like it's not just reserved for spiritual seekers, right? And great yogis where you do try to touch their feet. It's really, it really transcends society throughout. So I thought it shows a great deal of vulnerability as well, from a sense of protection. You're at the feet of you're at their mercy, so they can do with you what they will. If you're not able to defend yourself as much, if they're, it reminds me of the handshake of sorts. Apparently the handshake came from, hey, I don't have any weapons, here's my gesture. So it's maybe a gesture of this submissive gesture of great humility. But in general, maybe there's, or not in general, more specific yogic terms, maybe there's more of a truth there for some energetic terms of going to the feet. And we know that the feet are seen as dirty and unclean in a way. And maybe that's, something additional there to say, hey, I'm willing to touch your feet. I'm willing to go down to your feet where they might be dirty and unclean, but that's, my commitment to you, or something quite in a practical sense as well. But yeah, that's just my take. Mike?
I'm not sure my answer is great either, but I liked yours, Chris. Yours makes a lot of sense. I just thought that there was probably in the higher ages this kind of worldwide culture where we had like the same kind of gestures, and I guess India preserved this culture more than other cultures did. That's why in India it's usually always closer to what like the yogis describe than to what it would be in a Western country maybe. And it's interesting that you like mentioned like kings and queens, because I feel like they in the Middle Ages they kind of took for themselves the right to be a god, right, and wanted to be worshipped like a god. And I think that's where this whole Your Highness nonsense is from. And I think at the end of the day, bowing before someone or bowing before God is kind of like acknowledging that this is just my ego, and the thing that I really admire is God or the soul within the other person, right? And I think at the end of the day, it all comes from something that is true, but might be removed from it in different kind of ways in different cultures.
Yeah, the anointment of a king or queen, well, especially in England, it's got biblical roots. So they're trying to replicate that.
Sure.
Or the Archbishop of, obviously in a different way, but that's what they're trying to replicate. But it comes back to, here he's seeking forgiveness. But obviously this was probably, well, we can deduce one of the most blessed experiences of his life. And you would say that cutting off a sadhu's hand would be like the height of sin. But out of that sin seems to come a really big blessing, i.e. this experience that he's had that's life transforming, and the other officer as well. So my question is, did they actually commit a sin in this, or is the blessings one that they worked for perhaps their whole life or in the last few months or whatever? Chris?
I considered this, and my answer would be that if you're a police officer, you're a channel for righteousness. You are karma in action, in a sense. You're stopping the bad guys. That's what you're doing. So you probably build up a lot of good karma doing that job, because it's it's not a thankless job, but it's something that I think is a very, very very admirable role to take in society to help protect people. So I imagine he's probably built up a lot of karma. So he's banking in on that in some ways by witness such a miracle. But also it struck me when they kind of, both police officers came up to this sadhu, and it wasn't like the sadhu was being aggressive or trying to fight them off or anything. He had this back to them, and yet they wielded this axe. And I thought, wow, that's a bit of a overstep by the policeman. Like, that's unnecessary force. But maybe they were not in the right minds of sorts. Maybe they were sort of influenced to kind of go along to play a part in this story, in this play for the purposes of what we're discussing. We're all discussing this in Yogananda's great book. So maybe they were somewhat possessed by a good spirit to be able to go through with this action. That was my initial intuition on this, is that they simply played a part in the story. Didn't occur any kind of negative karma as a result. But Mike, what's your take?
I think in this particular case, I probably agree. I mean, Guruji says that in different places, right? That karma is accrued not always by the action, but by the intent of the action, right? And he was looking for a murderer, right? For someone who was acting to be a sadhu and stealing from people and apparently even killing them. Might he have used force like really easily? Yes. And maybe that was how things were done at this time. But in this case, the whole way that it worked out for him to meet the sadhu and him doing this miracle for him might have been a culmination in his life, right? Like he was living this life where he saw a lot of violence, and maybe this was a turning point for him. Maybe he actually saw the sadhu, and now he feel like, maybe I want to change my ways now. Maybe I want to become more peaceful. Maybe I don't even want to be a policeman anymore. Maybe I want to become more spiritual. It doesn't really, it's not really covered in the book, but I'd be interested to know if that made a meaningful impact on this policeman's life afterwards. He was definitely moved because he kept telling the story to everyone, right?
Do you guys think that one of us could be that policeman?
Sure, yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's why I always have an axe next to my bed.
Yeah, you've got.
I have it from a past life. Yeah.
Exactly. Your skill, your axe wielding skills are really, really impressive, Mike.
Yes.
Mike,
when I want to relax, I sharpen my axe. You know, like.
But it did strike me that, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably quite right, Mike. You know, this, as Yogananda says, it pushed him beyond his usual depths, and that probably would have stuck with him for lifetimes. You know, that's maybe the seed that you need to seek out God. And he does go on to describe this policeman as a worldly man. So we do have an indication of, you know, Yogananda's take on the spiritual development of the policeman, which probably kind of rubbed salt into the wounds of Yogananda at the moment, that Yogananda is so highly adept, you know, spiritually, and he can't have this experience. And it did, just to go back to actually to something you asked earlier, Mike, was how did the policeman, you know or react so quickly to recognize the man as a saint, a sadhu? Well, one, he was probably dressed as one, you know, he looked like what the murderer was masquerading as. But two, I thought maybe this was somebody of faith anyway, and maybe it is culturally correct, as you said, but he probably already had faith, and that's why he was able to take to it so quickly. He threw himself at the feet. He had no qualms with it, did he? So he probably had some underlying faith there to begin with. From what I surmise from it, but here we have the policeman. Sorry, before I go on, Priyank, do you want to
no, carry on.
And the policeman offers a clipping that he had taken himself, I imagine, and it was a newspaper clipping, and this was a Indian newspaper. And on it, the reporter had written the reporter's version, as Yogananda says, which was exaggerated of what happened during this miracle, this event. And the reporter had described the sadhu as almost being decapitated. So nothing to do with the arm. I presume that's referring to the head. His head had been almost decapitated. So the reporter had got the facts wrong. Shock. And this is what Yogananda kind of alludes to there. It says the sensational type of newspaper, and then not missing a lass even in India. I thought that was kind of funny, a little dig at the sort of journalism, at the industry of news reporting. He had gone through his own experience there, which we talked a lot about in the previous season, you know, this Awake documentary. We talked a lot about Yogananda's experience with journalists and things like that. He wasn't he wasn't happy with a lot of how the journalists kind of went after him from time to time. But this was a little subtle dig there, I liked, to the reporters. And he goes on, sorry, Priyank, jump in.
Yeah, so in the start of that paragraph, he says the officer concluded with a pious ejaculation. So before that, he said, you know, I feel like my life has been uplifted through his sanctity, and, you know, that he'd received a blessing. And there's obviously this, like, relating the story, he may have even had a little bit of a tear in his eye But I was wondering what would a pious ejaculation sound like? It's not like a sigh, is it? Is it like a bit of a whimper? Is it like a chanting of like Om? I can't even imagine what this. I don't think I've never been in anyone's presence where they've done a pious ejaculation.
Well,
Sounds cool.
pious apparently then means devoutly religious.
Hmm.
So that word means. So you could imagine the tone, if that sets the tone, the piousness sets the tone. And then, as you said, that I feel like my life is being uplifted through his sanctity. It was probably, just that he was reliving that moment, wasn't he? And for anyone, that would have been a game changer now. Seeing something, experiencing something like that, and having played the part as he played, he was probably quite relieved in some senses that the miracle did happen. Otherwise, he would feel quite bad about it, right?
I feel like, imagine he wouldn't have been a saintly sadhu, but he also wouldn't have been the murderer, and he would have hit him with the axe, and he would have hit the wrong person. That would have already caused some emotion in him, right? Like he hit someone, but unjustly, and because there is that thing, I'm catching a murderer, and it is allowed to use force. But then when you do it on the wrong person, then suddenly this all falls apart, right? So in a sense, this was then also a blessing, right? That he then was able to come back 3 days later, and it healed himself, right? It like got rid of that guilt that he felt in himself, right? He saw, oh, the guy's, he's healed. What I did was actually not that big a deal in his life.
Mm.
He can carry on.
Mm. There's three moments of the divine experience for him. I think the first is where he realizes his mistake and he bows completely at his feet. So it's like that complete feeling of apologies, or like seeking forgiveness from God, which also is a experience in itself, isn't it? And then the second experience is when he then goes to meet him after 3 or 4 days, and then it says here that the sadhu blessed us as he departed quickly, and then as a result he says that my life's been uplifted through his sanctity. So perhaps he made him his guru, we don't know, but so that blessing must have been quite something, because he has this, and then has this next thing to say, which is that when he's recounting the story, this is perhaps for potentially the first time with someone who's actually knows what he's talking about. So a newspaper, he may have related it to a newspaper, then they're just interested in the sensational elements of it. Whereas here he's met two devotees that are going to the Himalayas. So here he's speaking to someone that is, of the same ilk in terms of what he's feeling. So he can really open his heart. So this is like the third moment, isn't it, for him, where he's opened his heart about what he's just lived through in the last 3 days. So it's 3 layers of moments that conclude in this pious ejaculation, and it's moved him beyond his usual depth.
Yeah, I wonder then, Priyak, do you think that he's purely reciting the story to help share in that moment? Because Yogananda kind of reveals a little bit of how he feels the policeman is feeling himself, by saying there that the boys thanked the police officer, but Yogananda said he probably the police officer was probably intimating that he was more fortunate than we, and the boys lamented that they had missed the great yogi, that they felt that they could have seen a Christ-like yogi, but they hadn't. So yeah, maybe the police officer is saying, "Oh, hey, you boys wanted to see a yogi? Like maybe, I've met one. Me, this lowly police officer of, this worldly police officer or something. I've managed to meet one, and you boys haven't. So maybe he was rubbing it in. Yogananda felt he was rubbing it in a little bit as well.
Well, certainly he broke one of the rules, didn't he, of the spiritual path, where you don't talk about your deepest spiritual moments, because he must have revealed all these elements to this newspaper, and that's possibly the worst source you could reveal. It's one thing telling your dearest family, etc. It's another getting some potential fame through telling a newspaper, and you can see it was an instant mistake because they'd sensationalized, and in that sensationalization kind of also trivializes the moment for him, because it was a moving moment. But if someone's making almost like a mockery of it, then it makes the moment, it can diminish the moment for you. So there's that element.
And so Yogananda, in saying that both he and Amar had lamented in missing the great yogi, comments that India, although materially poor, had for the last 2 centuries had an inexhaustible fund of divine wealth, spiritual skyscrapers occasionally being conjured by the wayside, even by worldly men like this policeman. So there's a lot in there, isn't there? There's his love for India. He does make a very subtle comment here, and he specifies 2 centuries of being materially poor. I thought, well, what would it be that, why would India be materially poor for 2 centuries? You specified 2 centuries. And I thought, okay, I think I might know, but I'll Google it. And lo and behold, England may have been occupying from 1853, so that would have probably coincided to some degree, but I wasn't entirely sure, so I'll throw that open for discussion. But he does specify specifically 2 centuries being materially poor. Mike?
Yeah, one person, he's a bit controversial, but who writes about this extensively is Shashi Tharoor, right? And very eloquently. And I think one of the statistics I remember is that before the British came, India was involved in 20% of the world trade, and when they left, it was 5% or something. So, compare that to the railroad they built. I don't think it measures up at all. But another thing that my dad always told me that he found really impressive is when we did the podcast about the Awake movie, we talked about Swami Shyamananda that Dayama met in India, right? And he remembers there was a group of devotees standing around him, and one of them went up to him and said, "Why is India so poor?" And then Swami Shyamananda, he was silent for a moment, and then he just answered, "India was never poor," or that was his answer, and then he moved on to the next thing. So I think Yogananda also, the way that he puts 200 years there, and he also mentions it in other parts, that the fact that India is materially not wealthy right now is a karmic phase that is very limited in time.
Yeah, it is interesting and subtle. I read over it once and then I went back over it and thought, oh, actually he does specify 2 centuries. What happened there? But he does not dwell on it at all. But it does highlight instead the inexhaustible fund of divine wealth and spiritual skyscrapers. Such a beautiful line there, Priyank, isn't it?
Indeed. And he describes Sri Yukteswara similarly, in a similar vein, later on in the book, after describing him, in the sense that he says that, even though he doesn't put himself, make himself a center of attention and, go into politics and all those kind of things, he's just silently going about his work. Similar to what's his name, Lahiri Mahasaya as well.
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to the world, the spiritual renaissance he describes.
Yes. Yeah, and we have then the boys thanking the officer, even though they were tormented by hearing this wonderful story that they hadn't been able to live out their dreams to meet yogis and sadhus and meet their master maybe in the Himalayan mountains. They were instead in the coarse police station, and not at the feet of a master, as Yogananda says. So quite a teasing moment for the boys, and I thought maybe an early lesson for young Mukunda. So maybe he needs to focus on aligning his action with divine will in these early years. So that was a little lesson I took from it, living through Yogananda's life lessons. And so we'll look at the final few paragraphs here of this part of this chapter. Even though everything has happened so far in this story, that the boys had organized this trip, they had been cunning in their plan, but they were thwarted in this plan, that they had lost one of their amigos, one of their colleagues along the way, and they had these setbacks. Even though we have here Yogananda, knowing that he's so near to the Himalayas, and he says he's in captivity, he still felt doubly impelled to seek freedom. I thought to myself, wow, that is commitment and a half. He's in a police station as a young boy. If anybody else was in a police station as a young boy, they would think, wow, I'm in trouble. My parents are going to be mad, or I'm going to get grounded, or something's going to happen. He's here thinking, how can I escape? So he offers to his partner in crime, to Amar, let us slip away when the opportunity offers. Go on foot to Rishikesh. So he doubles down. He becomes even more determined in this moment, and he's smiling encouragingly, trying to lead the way and get his friend to somehow come up with a plan, I'm sure, to try to run away from this policeman. But here he is unfazed and keen to keep going. Priyank?
Yeah, I was wondering why he didn't try and run away as I was rereading this chapter, because the point where he gets captured, loosely captured, because I'm sure there weren't any handcuffs or anything involved, and I dare say these 12-year-old, 13-year-old boys were faster runners than a police officer, and in a busy city they could easily escape. So I would have tried to escape as well.
Yeah, it's so mischievous, isn't it, and rebellious for you. You're a young Mukunda in the making, or young Yogananda in the making, Frank.
Would you not have any respect from the policeman after the axe story?
No, this is. Oh yeah, okay, fine. Yeah. No, I would have ran before that. I would have ran away way before that. But after the axe story, yeah, may have changed my mind.
Yeah. Yogananda, I guess, was brought down to earth in some way by his companion, as he says here, that he had turned pessimist. So he had lost his second companion. So he lost both of them, and so Amar says, hey, the money's been taken from us. Or he may not say that, but Amar turned pessimist as soon as the money had been taken from them both. And Amar says then, if they had started the trek over such dangerous jungle land, they should finish not in the city of saints, but in the stomach of tigers. It's such an eloquent line there as well. You think from kids talking this way, but that's enough reasoning really to bring Yogananda to some form of a halt, and some sensibility coming into the minds of the boys. Priyank?
How much of that, eloquent prose that we read out here, how much do you think was actually said and thought versus artistic license?
He puts it in quotes, so I'm going to say it's I'm gonna say it's actual speak. Like
Nobody
Sigma.
talks like this. Come on. This is like the literary quartet. Like they're like I think he later on he took the meaning of what they said and put it in beautiful prose, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
But
It does sound like Yogananda.
I mean,
almost.
one thing that you can say is that he was actually translating from Bengali, right? So he can do it in whichever way he wants to, right?
even more license.
Yeah. So that's the scope of this episode. We covered a fair bit there. We do have three more episodes to go to conclude this chapter. So please do keep reading ahead if you do want to read with us. And if you think we missed anything, do let us know, dear listeners. But that concludes it. Did we miss anything, Print? Do you think, Mike?
No.
Anything come to mind?
It's all good. Other than talking about the next chapter, which I can do.
Take us away.
So Lauren, hopefully will be back. We didn't actually tell our podcast listeners that Lauren wasn't here. She hasn't just stayed silent the whole the whole podcast. That would be bad. No, she's not away, but she'll be back and she'll be leading us through the next, actually, how many? Next 30 or 40 paragraphs. It's actually a long one next time. So next time we'll be talking about, the reuniting of the brothers with their elder brothers, young Mukunda and Amar meeting their brothers, and one meeting is full of love and affection, and the other is full of a bit of anger, and then some comedic elements because they meet a saint. Ananta has a plan, ominous, quite a naughty plan to bring Mukunda back in line, and we're going to talk about that. And then in that, he also gets to meet a real saint. So nice little duality there. And then they talk more about how the cunning Ananta worked out all this plan of capture and how he actually did it, which was again quite funny. And then it ends with Jatinder, poor Jatinder, and his experiences under Ananta's investigative detective work. Mike?
I'm actually looking forward to that, because the first time when you hear that story, you think, oh, they would be see each other and they would start fighting, but instead Ananta goes like, okay, this is how I did it, and then he ridiculously
self-congratulatory.
Yeah, he crumbles pretty quickly under pressure, but it's a well organized and orchestrated and planned bit of pressure, isn't it? So we'll talk about that in the next episode.
Indeed.
So thank you, dear listeners, for joining us today, and see you next time. Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.